From
Don't, I repeat, don't, never count out the Iowa Hawkeyes. Don't you ever do it.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
This game has to be a microcosm of both seasons for the Iowa Hawkeyes and for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. I first want to start on the side of the home team, with the boys in red, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. You could put any quarterback, I believe, back there in this offense for Nebraska. You could probably put Michael Penix, Bo Nix, Caleb Williams. You could put some of the best quarterbacks in the country back there, and they'd find a way to let the ball slip out of their fingers, because it's been that way all season long for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. It's been Heinrich Haarberg. It's been Jeff Sims. It's been Chubba Purdy, even though Chubba has been the better quarterback, the best quarterback for Nebraska all season long. I know it's not setting a high bar, but yet he has still found a way to turn the football over to the other team. Like, you look at Chubba coming into that game against Maryland. Interception down by the goal line. And in this game, defensive lineman drops back in coverage, throws it to him. Big run leads to a Marshall Meter field goal. And that's exactly how this game was going to go. And a guy that's never kicked this season kicks in for Drew Stevens and puts it through the upright. So it's been turnovers. That has absolutely killed the Nebraska Cornhuskers this season. Okay, this is a team at one point in the year was 5-3. And despite losing the turnover battle every single game, they were looking okay with teams like Michigan State and Maryland and some of these winnable games down the stretch. But they lose 4 consecutive games to finish the year. For the Nebraska Cornhuskers, you got to figure it out on defense, man. There is absolutely no doubt about that. In this game, it proved to me these defenses are outstanding. Both of the defenses are great for both Iowa and Nebraska. The Huskers have got it figured out. Their main objective this offseason might be retaining Tony White as defensive coordinator, because they've got a lot of young guys coming back on this defense that can maybe make this defense even better. Maybe it can be one of the Big Ten's best defenses next season, but they got to figure something out on offense. They got to figure something out at the quarterback position. Is it going to be true freshman from the Omaha area, Daniel Kalen, coming in and make a difference? I don't know. You might have to go to the portal once again to figure things out at the quarterback position. I want to give a lot of credit as well one more time about Nebraska before I jump into Iowa for this game. There was a block party up front that the Nebraska volleyball front line might be jealous of. Their special teams kept them in this ball game. Right? The Nebraska special teams was the better special teams unit in this game. It's not very often Iowa and LeVar Woods gets out special team, but it happened in this game with a couple of block kicks that kept Nebraska in this game. I just said how much the turnovers affected them, and early in this game, there they were, giving Iowa the short field so maybe they could get a bigger lead, but the blocked field goals kept them in. Brian Buschini having a punt down within the 1-yard line. And then you look at the other side of the coin for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Of course, if you get a block kick, somebody's got to have their kick blocked, right? So that's kind of a couple of negative points for the Iowa Hawkeyes. You look at some kicks out of bounds. It just wasn't a great effort out there. Look, I know it was windy as it pertains to the kicking game, but still, it's something, definitely a plus for Nebraska in this game, but they couldn't turn it into a victory. You go back to the Scott Frost era, it's the same type of stuff. Sometimes you see good things, but it's finding ways to lose. Some teams find ways to win a football game. It seems like Nebraska, for the last handful of years, finds different ways to lose a football game. I said you never count out the Iowa Hawkeyes, and that's exactly what it felt like as this game was progressing towards the end. Okay, without Caleb Brown, when Caleb Brown dropped that pass in the end zone after that, injury. He was not able to return in this game. Iowa knew that they were extremely limited on offense. Iowa knew what was going on. And they just had to hang around and lean on their defense. Okay, and get a big run somewhere, and they got one after the interception. But lean on their defense and hope and maybe expect Nebraska to make the turnover late. And that's exactly what happened. And that's what makes Iowa so good. Okay, they're just so disciplined. They rarely make big-time mistakes in a football game. And that's what this one was. Okay, I've made this analogy and this comparison multiple times. Iowa's sitting at the poker table. They look their opponent straight in the eye and say, you're going to make a mistake, and I'm going to take advantage of it. And only at that time is when I'm going to push my chips to the center of the table, and that's exactly what happened with the Iowa Hawkeyes. They find ways to win. They find ways to sneak out with a victory. Boy, Iowa at 10-2. 10-2 after this Black Friday game. They're going to the Big Ten championship game. What a year. There's been so much within this Iowa program this season, from the Brian Ferentz deal to the historically low lack of offense throughout this whole year. But once again, you don't count out the Iowa Hawkeyes. They will always find a way, it seems, in the Big Ten West. They're always going to find a way. I want to talk about a few things with this Iowa Hawkeyes. They did a great job for the most part. I know there was one play where Chubba Purdy was able to break contain and get to the outside and make a play, but Joe Evans and some of these defensive linemen in Iowa did a great job keeping contained. Because if you saw last week where Chubba Purdy, he was able to get outside the pocket, break contain on the outside, and make some plays on Wisconsin. Iowa knew that they needed to keep him within the hash marks. They needed to keep him within the pocket. Because if Chubba was able to get outside, that was just another threat to this Nebraska offense. They didn't have a lot of threats right down the field in this game, but that was one that they wanted to keep to the inside, so to speak. And I thought Iowa did a really good job of keeping Chubba Purdy to the inside. You also got to give credit to Iowa in their coverage down the field. There was one play in this game where Jalen Lloyd beat Iowa deep, and that was it. These Nebraska receivers could not separate against these Iowa defensive backs. Iowa did a really good job in coverage. I said it during my preview that Nebraska needed to try to do what they did last year. They needed to try to hit a big play. Okay, their biggest offensive play in this game was doing that, was stretching the field. Okay, you couldn't just dink and dunk on Iowa and get to a victory, because Iowa was always going to be a sure tackling defense and keep everything in front of them. Hawkeyes knew the game plan. Hawkeyes knew it. We need to contain the run game. We need to do what we do back in coverage, and that's exactly what happened with the Iowa Hawkeyes. So I thought they did a great job in coverage and containing Chubba Purdy in this game. Look, we all know what next week's going to be. All right, Iowa fans, look, you're probably going to lose the game. Okay? In fact, you are going to lose the game. I mean, I'm just going to come out and say it. Right? Michigan and Ohio State are superior teams, are national championship caliber type of football teams. But what this Iowa team has accomplished, being forever Big Ten West champions, is something that you shouldn't take lightly. What they've overcome during this season has been a lot. Kirk Ferentz definitely should be in the Coach of the Year running, if not the Big Ten Coach of the Year. I thought he's done a fantastic job as a leader of this football team, keeping this football team together when there was so much going against them kind of on the offensive side of the ball and all the Brian Ferentz stuff towards the end of this season. Kirk did a fantastic job keeping them as one, keeping their goals in sight, and that goal was to be the final and forever Big Ten West champion. Look, I know there's going to be more Big Ten West games on Saturday, but this is a great way for the Iowa Hawkeyes, maybe the ultimate Big Ten West football team and football program, to send out the Big Ten West. All right, guys, let's dive into this one a little bit. I'll get to some of your comments here as we break this one down a little bit more. And I'll put up the call-in line just in case you want to vent about this one. So I got to put in my headphones here as I kind of go back and look at these comments here. I'll as we consider. What a game. What a game this was. And I'll tell you what, some people might not like it. Some people might think it's ugly football, and that's fine. And that's fine. You're entitled to your own opinion. But what a job. What a job for Iowa. This game had me on the edge of my seat, I think, to the bitter end as well here. All right, LFG checking in here today. He says, wild. Another luck-filled win for Iowa. That's certainly one person's perspective. Credit to Parker and Kirk Ferentz, though, who out-coach Rule at the end of the game. Honor to whom honor. Like you talk about coaching. I think you got to bring up Matt Rule a little bit in this game. Burning timeouts in places that you didn't need to burn timeouts. Now a little bit maybe goes on the personnel for that side of things. But, yeah, that was a big part in this football game. And Nebraska maybe getting a little bit conservative there towards the end of regulation as well, I think needs to be talked about. All right? Because I understand why Nebraska's being conservative. But what I just said about this is a team that constantly turns the football over. And this seems like their coaches, their coordinators don't trust them, right, to go down the field and get into the end zone, make the throw, make whatever play. I don't blame the coaching staff. I understand where they're coming from here at Nebraska. It's just, what can you do? What can you do? I thought there were points in this game in the second half where Nebraska almost abandoned the run game a little bit. Like they came out in the second. I understand Iowa was doing a really good job stepping up in this run game and making some big time plays. I know it was tough. Okay, against these teams, against these defenses all afternoon long. Nothing was going to be easy. But I just thought they got away from it a little bit. I think they wanted to have Chubba Purdy get in there and make some plays. Okay. It just didn't happen. But Nebraska, they looked in full position to make a bowl game. And it didn't turn out that way. Jason here checking in. Jason Geldon. Nebraska has to be the dumbest program ever. I don't know if I'd go that far, but there continue to be mistakes. Charlie Yellowstone checking in. Go Hawks with a thumbs up. Paul Wall checking in. Nebraska is a dumpster fire. You see a lot of the same stuff. And I just want to say this, and I want to make this very clear. Nebraska is better than under Matt Rule than they are under Scott Frost in a lot of different ways. Look at that defense. That defense is a top 5 defense in this conference. In a year where this conference has really, really good defensive play. All right, but there are some areas where Nebraska's still going to Nebraska, turning the football over, finding ways to lose again in the end. Big Ten TED Champions Club member Jared Jones chiming in. I can't believe how much I enjoyed that game. I hope the Big Ten never takes that off Black Friday. They're not only not taking it off of Black Friday, they're adding to it. Right tonight, you're going to see Penn State and Michigan State. So give me a double dip of Black Friday. If you saw me on Twitter, I had my turkey, my mashed potatoes and gravy, stuffing. I had everything set up there for a great way to enjoy some Black Friday football. This is the best lunch. The best lunch of the year is on Black Friday. And I had a great time of it at halftime, right as the second half started. I had a really good time as well. Going for gold, 85, check it in. I do feel more confident about this team. They got to find a quarterback. Nebraska needs to find a quarterback that can hold on to the football. Okay, when you put a job posting out on Indeed or wherever you're trying to hire someone, there are qualifications for a job. If Nebraska is putting an Indeed post out there, what they're trying to say right now is qualification number 1, hold on to the football. Okay, there's been some bad fumbles this year, but Chubba Purdy just rolling out and literally just dropping the ball and slipping out of his hands. I'm not sure what happened on that one. But like I said, it doesn't matter, it seems, who's in there at quarterback. They find a way to turn the ball over. Change it. I think something needs to be fixed. Something needs to be changed. I don't know what it is, because you put any of the quarterbacks in there, and I know some quarterbacks like Heinrich Harburg has turned it over less than Jeff Sims, but still, you got to figure things out at the quarterback position. And I know injuries are a big part of this as well. Going for Gold 85, excited for Chubba Purdy's future. Yeah, I want to make that known as well, that Chubba Purdy has shown, like, this is the best guy in the room right now. Chubba Purdy is the best thing Nebraska has, hands down. You look at Jeff Sims at the beginning of the year. Let me say this. Passing-wise, okay, they've all turned the ball over. Passing-wise, Jeff Sims and Chubba Purdy are your best options. And then Chubba Purdy brings a little bit of the run game, even though Jeff Sims does as well. But I think I'm still favoring this in favor of Chubba Purdy to kind of go down there and make some plays as well. Paul Wall chiming in. Think Penn State. That was a 31-0 victory in that whiteout in the rain and all of the weather conditions out there as well. The Buckshot Kid chiming in. What a high-scoring game in this one as well. Redlegs, to each their own, but Redlegs says that might have been the worst game I've ever watched. What a snooze fest. Jared Jones, Buckeye fan, big game tomorrow. Ohio State and Michigan. McCord is the type of quarterback that takes advantage of. I'll be nervous if we win tomorrow. Man, that Iowa defense against a quarterback like Kyle McCord, Mr. Roller Coaster, that is certainly a matchup. Like, whoever Iowa faces off against in the Big Ten Championship, whether it's Michigan or whether it's Ohio State, I would not expect a 28-0 game at halftime. I would not expect just a complete domination in the first half. Could it happen? Sure, of course it could happen. But I could maybe see in this first game, right, Michigan and Ohio State did not see the Iowa Hawkeyes this season. So early on in this game, I could see Iowa maybe pushing back on things like I cite last year's Iowa game against Ohio State in Columbus, where that one was fairly close early on, but of course the offense at Iowa couldn't do anything. Eventually the dam broke, and Ohio State, I think, put up almost 50 points. Maybe they scored over 50 points in that football game. But I look at this thing going forward for Iowa. I think a big key as we advance now to the Big Ten Championship game has to be the health of Caleb Brown. Because early in this season, middle of the season, I was talking about, where is Caleb Brown? This is the guy that everybody talked about coming out of the transfer portal. Sounded like it kind of took him a while to really get settled into this offense, learn this offense. But these last few games, he's been the guy. He's been the target. And then when he went out in this game, that really took out any semblance of an offensive threat that the Iowa Hawkeyes really had in this football game. Iowa finds a way to beat the Nebraska Cornhuskers once again. If you want to talk about it, there is the call-in number, 715-600-2150. In the meantime, I will get to some more comments. LFG, chime it in. Lose by 30-plus next week, but whichever arrogant program wins the game, you know that team will feel like they will roll Iowa. The Big Ten Championship needs a blowout. Yeah, we'll see what happens. I could see that game being, let me just throw out 13-3 maybe at halftime. Something like that. Maybe even like 13-0, right? Maybe where the offense, like look at Ohio State sometimes this season. Look at Ohio State against a team like when they played at Wisconsin earlier this season. Okay, sometimes, maybe, and then you look at the way Iowa's playing defense right now, they are really hitting their stride, even though they don't have Cooper DeJean, and that's really going to hurt them, of course, playing against an Ohio State or playing against a Michigan. But this is a team in Iowa that's playing their best defensive football right now. Of course, if they don't have Caleb Brown, they might not score any offensive points against defenses like Ohio State and Michigan. Look, this game, it's probably this upcoming Big Ten Championship game. It's probably not going to be close. All right, it's just not going to be there. So You just got to be ready for that. But I could see maybe in the first half it being somewhat in reach. All right, let's get to some more comments here. LFG, more comment here. Purdy definitely gives Go Big Red Nation hope. Agree 1,000,000%. I'll agree with that. There is some hope there for the Nebraska Cornhuskers if they can once again find a way. And maybe it's something else within this offense that maybe puts quarterbacks in a situation to turn the football over. But it's as simple as just dropping the ball. I know that wasn't a turnover because Nebraska recovered it, but then late in the game, just throwing it right to a defender. It was a similar thing against Maryland down by the goal line, right, where he just throws it right to a defender. I don't know. They got to work on some things this offseason to really clean that up. If they can, Nebraska, you look at their schedule upcoming for 2024, the first half of it is pretty favorable. The back half gets a little bit tougher, but they got to figure things out. We know they're going to be good on defense. This is a young team overall, and maybe this is the kind of mistakes that a young team really makes. They're not going to lose a lot of guys, right? They might lose some guys in the secondary, at linebacker kind of thing, but those are holes that you can easily plug within the transfer portal. I'd expect Matt Rule to be able to do that as well. I also want to say this as it pertains to the Iowa Hawkeyes. The last few games, I don't know if it's just because what's going on within this program right now, but Kirk Ferentz and just the season that they've been through, but Kirk Ferentz right now, very emotional in a lot of these post-game interviews. You saw some locker room footage earlier, I should say last week, where the emotional. I don't know. Some people are out there are saying that maybe this is the swan song for Iowa. I don't know if I'm connecting those dots quite yet. I don't know if I'm connecting those two things. But like I said, maybe it's just the adversity that they've been through, all the Brian Ferentz stuff, and just finding a way to plug away and win a lot of these close games, right? What Iowa has been able to do, Nebraska hasn't done, right? Iowa going out and winning these close games, finding a way, and Nebraska finding a way to maybe come up on the short end of the stick as well. Jared Jones coming in with the in-depth analytics. Iowa has never lost to a Purdy, right? Brock Purdy did not do too well against the Iowa Hawkeyes in his time at Iowa State as well. More from LFG. I hope Nebraska would make a bowl game. They brought it all season. I don't think their APR is that high, so I don't think that a bowl game in terms of being a 5-7 team. I think Minnesota is towards the top of that. I don't think Nebraska is that high, if my memory serves me correct, when it comes to these things as well. So, yeah, this might be it. And now it's back to the drawing board, and now it's off-season time for Matt Rule and his program. Of course, this is the time you've already started to see some transfer portal stuff start to heat up, and maybe Nebraska is going to be heavily involved in that going forward. Matt Rule has put together a top 25 class recruiting for 2024. I don't think there's any doubt that this program at Nebraska is going in the right direction. It's turnovers. How many games did turnovers cost them this year? Winnable games, you look at Wisconsin's winnable, Maryland's winnable, Michigan State's winnable, Iowa's winnable. I mean, that's 4 games right off the top, right, for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Okay, they won 5, that's 9. Look, I know not every single game is going to turn that way, but that's the one thing that they need to focus on. And I don't know if you can necessarily accomplish it during the offseason, but that's got to be preached during this offseason, is how do we protect the football? What do we need to do? The first step has to be finding talent at the quarterback position. And the thing about this is, this was not something that happened in Game 3, Game 4, Game 5. This is something that happened right away. In the first game of the year, Thursday night, boy, that does not seem that long ago. That does not seem 4 months ago or whatever it was. Right, this happened in the first game of the year with Jeff Sims against Minnesota. Minnesota, right, one of those one-possession games that cost them. So it keeps happening for Nebraska. Can they figure it out? I think that's the big thing. That's the big question that we're going to see coming forward. Sanjio coming in. Never count them out. More like count on Nebraska to give the game away. Purdue threw Purdy threw a perfect throw to Iowa on their final drive. Plain and simple, Iowa didn't win as much as Nebraska choked. It goes both ways. I'll say that, but I will definitely agree with this statement. I've said that before, and I said this as well prior here earlier in the show, is that Nebraska finds ways to lose. The quarterbacks find new ways to turn the football over. I don't know if we've seen it this season for Nebraska where quarterbacks, now, like I said it again, I'll say it a million times, it was not a turnover where Chubba Purdy's rolling out and he just drops the ball, but they find new ways at the very least to put the ball on the ground. But there's something to be said for this Iowa team, for the defense hanging in there and limiting Nebraska and then making the play late with the defensive lineman grabbing the interception and then getting the big enough run to set themselves up for an easy chip shot field goal. You know, for as many different ways as Nebraska finds ways to lose, Iowa, it seems like, finds many different ways to sit in there and win a football game. They know what they have to do. They know when they're playing in the phone booth what they have to do to win a football game. And I'll admit, it's fun to watch. When I'm watching this game kind of coming down the stretch, I'm looking, it's like, I honestly didn't know which way this one was going to go. Okay, because in theory, it was going to be Nebraska. How are they going to find a way to lose? How is Iowa going to find a way to win? Like when this one was 10-10 and the field position was kind of flipping back and forth and flipping back and forth, I didn't really know. That's what made this game so intriguing, and that's what made this game so exciting to me, is every time they snapped the ball, you felt like anything could happen. So, yeah, it's Husker JPG chiming in. Doesn't do clock management. Yeah, that's I think that's putting it lightly right there. Yeah, there were timeouts in certain situations. I touched on this before where they came in and it didn't go well. Didn't go all that well. Nebraska is the best ever at snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Couldn't say to myself that from Jared Jones as well. So Nebraska falls 13-10 to the Iowa Hawkeyes. In this game, Iowa, of course, advances to the Big Ten championship game. LFG, a comment here. I don't know if Purdy threw the ball straight to Iowa or whether the Iowa defender made a skilled play. Boy, I tell you what, when they showed that replay from behind Chubba Purdy, it sure looked like he threw it right to him. Okay, because, what I will say is I don't think Chubba Purdy expected him to be there. He did not expect the defensive lineman to drop back in coverage, and you got to credit Iowa for confusing Chubba Purdy, for doing that sort of coverage and dropping him back into that zone, right? Because when I saw that replay from multiple angles, and especially when they showed the replay from behind Chubba Purdy, it certainly didn't look like he was expecting that defender to be there. But that's what a quarterback has to do. You got to read the coverage. You got to see what's directly in front of you. And he didn't see it. He didn't see it. For how much better Chubba Purdy is than maybe the Jeff Sims of the world and the Heinrich Harburgs of the world, for as much of that as there still is some head scratching, some face palm, whatever you want. There still is that with Chubba Purdy. There's still that. So they got to find a way to get things done here in the offseason. Appreciate the super chat from Dave Valensky. Appreciate that. Hit the $sign and make a donation if you want your comment featured. Interesting ending to a college football game. Who would have thought that your hometown clock operator cost you the game? Let's talk about that, right? It is Nebraska has the football, and they are driving down the field. And they pretty much just don't run the clock for a single play, right? It's about 10 seconds where they don't run the clock. Maybe at that point of time where Nebraska has the football, it looks like, oh, Nebraska little home cooking, getting a little bit more time on this drive, but nope, it flips back the other way against them and out of their favor, leaves more time for the Iowa Hawkeyes to get in position eventually to kick a field goal late in the game. Yeah, that was certainly something that people are going to talk about as this thing as people break this one down. They're going to talk about that a lot more in this game. And look, it's a football game. Yes, there were some missed calls down the field. I think it was Quentin Newsome tugging on Nico Regaini a little bit down the stretch. So yes, there were some calls in this game, but yeah, that was one from the hometown clock operator that certainly stood out to me as well towards the end of this football game. But when it comes down to it, for the Iowa Hawkeyes, they did a really good job at they did a really good job at playing within the phone booth and playing within the box. Like, they only let Nebraska beat them deep one time. I said it in my preview. If Nebraska, I think they need to stretch the field, to open up other parts of their offense. It happened one time, and Nebraska didn't really work down the field. And there was times late in this game where it didn't even look like they wanted to continue to work the ball down the field. So there's that as well. I'm interested to see what the next few weeks really hold for the Nebraska Cornhuskers, what type of adjustments that they're going to make now as their offseason really kicks into gear. For Nebraska, I think it's mixed feelings a lot for this team, because I can understand the fans saying that we feel like we didn't improve this year. Yeah, I think the goal for Nebraska was, let's get to a bowl game. Let's clear that hurdle, and then let's continue to improve as a football program. Now you're sitting there at 5-7. It appears that the bowlless streak is going to continue. You've had a lot of the same mistakes, turning the ball over. Okay, the one thing that's really different is their stout defense. And then what happens this offseason if the one big improvement of Nebraska football hits the road and decides to become a head coach, and Tony White? Then what happens? Then I think you've got a lot of questions to ask yourself. You've got a lot of questions to really ask yourself going forward in this offseason. And look, this is a pivotal offseason for everybody within this league. Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, no divisions. Everything's going to change. How you approach recruiting. What is your bar for success? Look at these. Look at the flag behind me. The flag that is soon to be retired. Rest in peace. What's going to happen to those 7 programs? What is going to be their barometer for success? I think Nebraska's barometer for success this year, let's get to a bowl game, and then let's see what happens from there. We know what the barometer of success is for Michigan, for Ohio State, even some of the incoming programs like in Oregon, even like a USC. Like, we know the expectations of those programs. How are these programs now going to change? Now going to adapt? Even for Iowa, right? You're forever Big Ten West champions. But how are you going to change and adapt? That is something that I also have my eye on. But Iowa, you still got the Big Ten championship game. You still got a bowl game. Like, you still got a couple of games still out in front of you. But that's certainly something that you got to think you're looking at the corner of your eye in this game. More from LFG once again. I wanted Nebraska to make a goal game this year because they've played hard all season. They've certainly played hard. Like, there's no doubt about it. Playing hard, playing smart, maybe a couple of different things. Maybe a couple of different things for this Nebraska team right now. It's all about the turnovers. It's all about the turnovers. Okay, I said at the very beginning of this show, this game was a microcosm of the season, and maybe the last 5 or 6 seasons really, for the Nebraska program and for the Iowa program. You got to think there's going to be some in Husker country that are going to be saying, we look parts of our team, maybe the end result of a lot of one-score losses, clock management, turnovers. Is that Matt Rule dressed up at the sideline? Or is it Scott Frost in a Matt Rule costume? Look, I understand Matt Rule has made some improvements for this Nebraska football team, but you got it. And I know it's year one. Like, it's year one. You got to put it all into perspective. I understand that. And I even said this, I think I even said it back in September. It says in some of these games against the Minnesotas and against the Colorados, you got to show some sort of improvement at some point. You got to show some progression on offense. And in some of those areas that really held you back as a football program. You know, this game is a lot. There's a lot of talking points about Nebraska. But you look at the other side of the coin and you look at the Iowa Hawkeyes. What else can you say for Iowa? You know, bad offense, great defense. You hung in there. You made a kick to win a football game. I said it in my original commentary. This was a rare game that the Iowa Hawkeyes got out special teamed by the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And I thought as this game was really moving along, that might be the ultimate determining factor. I said it in my preview. The last thing, my parting words, so to speak, in my preview were kicking game, special teams. Who's going to win that battle? Who's going to pin the other team deep? Because none of these offenses are going to be able to go 90, 95, etc. yards down the field. That's just not going to happen. All right. So that's why the punt game, the kick game was so big early in this one. Iowa had so many. I thought Iowa early in this game had a lot of opportunities to really distance themselves. Right. There was the fumbled, what was that, a punt kick early in this game, and then another fumble. But give credit to Nebraska with the blocked field goals, with all of the other things that they did to step up to keep this game close. I thought as this game was progressing, I thought that would eventually be the story. Nebraska's defense, Nebraska's special teams made plays early, kept them in it enough for the Huskers to make the play in the end. But how many times can I be fooled, right? How many times can I think? It's just like, maybe I need to sit here and say, Nebraska needs to prove it to me that they can go down at the end of the game and make enough smart and good plays to win. This was not one of those showings. This was not one of those games where Nebraska was going to make those types of plays. Michael Schultz chiming in. Go Hawks. Go Hawks. What a game for the Iowa Hawkeyes. What a game. And this was all done, of course, without their corner, Cooper DeJean, who's out for the season. And I said this, I think, prior to that Illinois game. I didn't think the loss of Cooper was good. Look, when you lose an All-American defensive back, of course, it's a big deal. But I thought this Iowa defense was good enough back there in the secondary to make the necessary adjustments. Phil Parker and this coaching staff was going to make the necessary adjustments to be ready, not only for Illinois last week, but for Nebraska this week. Of course, Illinois was a much more dangerous offensive threat, right, with what they've been doing with John Paddock, Isaiah Williams, et cetera, in the passing game, as opposed to Nebraska this week. For Nebraska, I talked about it before with the run game. Second half, I thought they maybe got away from it a little bit. I understand why they got away from it. I get it, and I said this early in the show, but I want to say it again for those of you just popping in. There were some people on Twitter that are saying, get back to the run game, get back to the run game, get back to the run game. And this is a Nebraska team. Emmett Johnson, I think he's got a really bright future in Lincoln, Nebraska, right? From right here down the road in the Twin Cities. But I understand why they were going to the air. I get it. But I would have maybe liked to see a little bit more balance, maybe just a teeny bit, little bit more on the run game as well. Let's get to some comments. I see some more comments coming in. It's amazing. Connor McCaffrey here chiming in. It's uncanny, he says. We'll never see another team like this as long as we live. Just so unimaginable. And what is it going to take for Nebraska to, like the comment says here, we'll never see another team like this as long as we live. When's it going to flip? That's what I want to know. I was asking these questions in September after Minnesota and after Colorado. When is this thing going to flip for the Huskers on offense? I want to make sure I say that on offense because the thing has definitely flipped on defense. What Tony White has done in this 3-3-5 scheme this year has been great. It's been tremendous. So great job on that side of the ball. But it's on offense because that's where Nebraska has lost a lot of these one-score games down the stretch. It's a lot of the same stuff that we heard last season. A lot of the same stuff we heard last season. Thank you, Roger Edwards, for tuning in. Appreciate that here this afternoon. We got Ohio State and Michigan coming up tomorrow. Later tonight, Penn State set to take on Michigan State over there at Ford Field on NBC. Connor McCaffrey, no, it would be a miracle for a team with this offense, talking about Iowa here, to go 6-6, 10-2 is just impossible. Well, it is clearly possible because they found a way to make it happen. They know who they are. Self-awareness is such a big thing in sports, college football, whatever you want to call it. It's so big to know who you are and what box that you can play within. And Iowa knows who they are and what they are. This offense with Deacon Hill had gotten better the last few weeks. I think Brian Ferentz and everybody on this offense knew early, they could figure it out early in this game, it was going to be really hard to move the ball on this Nebraska defense. They knew that their defense, the Iowa's defense, needed to throw pretty darn close to a no-hitter. Now, I'm not saying that was going to be overly difficult against this Nebraska offense. But they knew that they needed to play really well, and they just needed to lean in there, and someone needed to make a play in the end. You know, that last 6, 7, 8 minutes, you were just waiting there, 10-10, after Nebraska, after Tristan Alvano missed that field goal, a lot of people were just sitting there, and we were waiting. Who's going to screw up? That's what creeped into my mind. Who's going to screw up? Who's going to make the turnover? And then the more I kind of thought about it, because I said earlier here in the show, early in the game I thought Nebraska was making enough plays to maybe win the game. But then as I kind of thought about it a little bit more, I'm like, this is the Iowa way. This is the Iowa way. Hanging in there, back and forth, field position, waiting for you to make a mistake. I think it was like last year, right, when Iowa played Minnesota, and Jack Campbell made that play late in the game. It was a very similar game like this. Let's get to some more comments. Always with refs and clock operators. It's always something, right? Seems like they can never get away from it. And it's crazy. It could have been 11-1. I'm very curious what this discussion would be if Iowa found a way to pull it out and keep the pig and keep the Floyd of Rosedale at 11-1. This, I think, would have a lot of juice going. Not saying this Big Ten championship game doesn't have juice, because I think it does. Especially with the way Iowa's defense is playing. But I think it would have a little bit more juice than it is right now. Ray Owens also should have been 11-1. I feel like we're going to be hearing that. We are going to be hearing about the fair catch. That we're going to be hearing that 5 years, 10 years down the road. I feel like we're going to be hearing that for a very long time. Very long time. Ray Owens also chiming in. Nebraska was lucky to even be in this football game. But they were, and you got to give credit to Nebraska's defense for that. Right? Now, the game plan of Nebraska's defense And Iowa's defense was fairly similar, right? Both of these teams, Trev Alberts said it in an interview early in the week. He's talking, of course, on the point of Nebraska. We have 5 wins. They had 9, but we're not too different, right? And I generally agree with that because both of these teams, defensive-minded, right? Defensive-minded, lackluster on offense. And they've both had to deal with a lot of injuries. Iowa and Nebraska, very similar. But you know what the one big difference is? It's turnovers. Iowa doesn't do it. Nebraska does. Let's get to some comments. Some more comments, I should say. Connor McCaffrey, against Iowa's offense, every opponent is in the game. They don't score a ton of points, so they can't separate themselves. So being in the game, I can see where you're coming from there. Nebraska has a bunch of injuries, don't they? Boy, where do I start? You take a look at a couple of guys on the offensive line, including senior Ethan Piper. Of course, you look at some of the top receivers, Marcus Washington and Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, right, coming back this season. You look at their top 2 running backs. You look at Gabe Irvin Jr. and Ramir Johnson. Like, they went down, and they went down early. So Nebraska had to find a way to pivot early in this season. It was impressive how they were still able to kind of come out on the winning end. Like, look at some of the games that they won this year. Remember, this was a Nebraska team that beat Northwestern, a team that could be a 7-win team, a team that will be at the very least in a bowl game at the end of this season. Let us get to some more comments. Iowa, of course, had a bunch of injuries as well. And that's what I was saying before. These two teams are very similar. Right? I watched that Trev Alberts interview, and I thought he was right on the money with that. These two teams aren't terribly different. But there's one spot where they are. And that's keeping the football in your hands. Let's get to some more comments. Our guy Immaculate. Last ever West Division champions. Go Hawks. The forever Big Ten West champion. Immaculate. This is your division for the remainder of time. Unless we maybe go back to pods, which came up discussion on Twitter, pods divisions, however you want to. If we get maybe 4 divisions in the future, if we break it down once again, if the Big Ten expands to 20 or 24 teams or something like that, maybe then there will be a Big Ten West, but who knows if Iowa will be in it, right? It might be a bunch of West Coast teams or something over there. But yeah, this is certainly something that Iowa can really claim, that they can hang the last Big Ten West championship banner of all time. Grant Williams, Mr. Cooper DeJean, was shown with those big passes Iowa gave up. And that was kind of like last year's Nebraska football game. I don't think they gave up a ton of big passes. Like I said in my preview, they needed to stretch the ball down the field. But I thought Iowa did a pretty good job at keeping a lot of stuff in front of them. That's what they needed to do all game long. Keep everything in front of you. Nebraska's not going to beat you time after time. And they knew it. Nebraska was eventually going to make a mistake, and that's what happened. All right, let's get to some more comments. A lot of people talking about Cooper DeJean, and I said this earlier. That was a really big part and a really big piece through this game for Iowa, and a big loss, of course, for the Iowa Hawkeyes. But Phil Parker's a good enough coordinator, and they've got good enough. Like, look at Sebastian Castro back there. I know Jamari Harris was, kind of up and down at times in the defensive backfield there for Iowa. They got Xavier back there. Like, they've got enough talent back there. And then you kind of look at the matchup with Nebraska going over the top. I want to talk about Nebraska's youth for a minute, especially on offense. Like, I know Husker fans, and I said before during the show, when's it going to flip? This is a young team, and because you saw a lot of maybe those skill players early in the season go down due to injury, this is a young team. I really like what I see in Nebraska out of Jalen Lloyd, right? Remember the long touchdown catch against Purdue. You saw the long touchdown catch here against Iowa. Malachi Coleman was, of course, the recruit that a lot of people, a local guy out of Lincoln East, that a lot of people were really excited about. Where's we need to see a little bit more out of him. We need to see a little bit more out of him. Look, I know he's young. He's a true freshman. He was playing freaking high school football, playing receiver and defensive line last year for Lincoln East. I know there's a long way to go for these kids. And this is going to be the first real offseason now where they've now got a Big Ten schedule in their back pocket and they can figure out who they are, what kind of players they are, and how they can develop going forward. All right, let's get to some more comments. If Iowa, got to wait for the computer to flip the comment. There it is. If Iowa plays Ohio State, Marvin Harrison Jr. might have a field day. Yeah, it seems like we know it's going to be a mismatch, right? Ohio State or Michigan. Man, I am pumped. I am pumped for the Buckeyes and the Wolverines, no question about that. I picked Michigan earlier in the week, 24-20 on my YouTube pick'ems. And then almost immediately after I clicked that button that said, that's my pick, almost immediately after I'm like, oh, crap, did I make the wrong pick? And I've been going back and forth kind of all week long as it pertains to Ohio State and Michigan. But like I said, I can see Iowa hanging around with a Michigan or with an Ohio State early, maybe the first quarter and a half, heck, maybe even going into halftime. But second half, eventually, you got to think the adjustments would be made to go over the top. And Iowa, of course, just doesn't have an offense. Right? And the health of Caleb Brown. Like, if Caleb Brown is not there and he's not doing anything in that Big Ten championship game, that's where they're going to really take a hit. And Immaculate, he knows more about this stuff than I do. If there is a new West Division, it'll be a West Coast Division. So it probably won't be Iowa. No, it won't be Iowa anyway. So Iowa can, at least this current iteration of the Big Ten West, they'll be the last ones. Ray Owens chiming in. Believe Hawkeye fan. Matt Rule is the guy, and better days are ahead for Nebraska. The schedule is going to get a lot harder, tougher in the Big Ten. And I think that's why so many teams within the Big Ten West were fighting to win that title this year. Like, you look at the Wisconsins, the Minnesotas, the Iowas, the Illinois, the Nebraskas. Like, the teams that were in the race, you can even throw a Northwestern into there. Purdue won the Big Ten West, heck, last season. Like, you look at all those teams, the expectations are going to change tenfold for these programs. I maybe whether it's now, whether it's later, at some point I'll pull up these schedules in 2024. Like, Nebraska's it's tough. It is tough next season. Okay, you look at the team right now. Look at what the type of team Oregon is. Oregon's a national championship level team, and they're for 2024. They have the second ranked right now recruiting class in the Big Ten, 6th in the country. Dan Lanning is consistently putting together top 10 classes. USC, hey, they hire my guy Jim Leonard, and now you've got one of the best defensive minds, and now you've got one of the best offensive minds in Lincoln Riley on the same team recruiting in the Big Ten Conference, a Power 2 league. Immaculate bringing up a good point. Sebastian Castro, man, he's been so fun to watch. That's been the player that has really stepped up on this Iowa defense. He was a beast. He took on a blocker, threw him into the ball carrier. Absolute stud. Yeah, he's one of those guys at Iowa that does a really good job at stepping up and playing the run, a physical defensive back. I think they do a really good job at coaching that. And I just want to give credit. You could tell on this broadcast, Ross Tucker, his Twitter handle wasn't the only thing that gave this away, but he was definitely an NFL guy. And when you look, but he made a good point on this about these defensive linemen. They do an excellent job at shedding blocks. They have so much. I said it in August in the preseason, how much depth that there is on this Iowa defensive line. They lost maybe their best defensive lineman, Noah Shannon, right? Ridiculous that he was not able to play this year. That's a whole different thing. They lost possibly their best defensive lineman, and yet they still roll out Joe Evans. They still roll out Aaron Graves and Y.A. Black and all of these other guys that are extremely great, shedding blocks, taking out of the inside, working off, flowing to the football, a great deep defensive line. Deep defensive line. Like, they didn't have an elite maybe type of player like a Johnny Newton or somebody like that, but this was still an extremely deep and great defensive line this year for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Whoever Iowa plays in the Big Ten championship game, that offensive line better be ready. I think Ohio State, right, we know the losses that they've had at tackles. Maybe Iowa would match up a little bit better against theirs. We know Michigan's offensive line has been banged up, even though it looks like the Wolverines will be healthy kind of going into this game tomorrow. So whoever is the offensive line in this game, they better be prepared to take on that Iowa defensive line. Let's get to some more comments. Yeah, Sebastian Castro more there from Jared Jones. Phil Parker, man. He's a genius. He's a genius. There's going to be some questions that are going to be asked and that we're all going to find out, maybe pretty soon, here for the Iowa Hawkeyes as we get ready past the Big Ten Championship and into the bowl game, what the future is here for Iowa. Iowa's one of those teams that, 2 out of 3 Big Ten West titles, and they've won them a certain way. How is that way going to translate to the new Big Ten? I know we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but it's certainly something that's been in the back of my mind as well. A leader, Noah Shannon was as well, according to our guy, Immaculate. So, unfortunately, I only made one graphic for this stream. I wanted to get on early and have this thing going. But, of course, we've got Penn State and Michigan State later tonight. I fully anticipate this game between the Nittany Lions and Spartans to be Penn State City. I expect them to really go out and really come out on top and play really good football throughout this game. But I just wanted to come on and talk about this game, Nebraska and Iowa. Iowa, of course, it was already clinched before this game, but moving on to the Big Ten Championship game, the Heroes Trophy comes back to Iowa City. I think there would have been, even though Iowa would have went on to play with a 9-3 record if they lost this game, Iowa would have went on to play in the Big Ten Championship game, obviously. That was already decided. But if they would have lost 2 in a row to Nebraska, it's kind of one of those things. They would have lost to Nebraska. They would have lost to Minnesota. Great, we'll take that forever Big Ten West title, but maybe a little bit of a bittersweet feeling if that were to happen kind of the other way. Yeah, talking more, I see in the comments about the future of Kirk Ferentz and everybody kind of in town right now. And I get that. I get everything that's happening. This team, I think, can still win with Kirk Ferentz as that head coach. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Ray Owens chiming in. Ryan Grubb, he's from Iowa, and what he's done with Michael Penix, Roma Dunze, and that entire Washington offense has been really good. It's been really fun to watch. I think he could possibly come in and make a big impact right away for the Iowa Hawkeyes if he were to become the head coach. Okay, that's a really good pick. If they do eventually go in another direction, and Kirk has said, hey, if you want me to go out bird watching, I'm not sure now's the time, right? He's kind of said that in regards to retirement. But there has been a lot of emotion around this team. In some of the videos we've seen behind the scenes in the locker room, and of course in some of these post-game interviews, But maybe it's just due to what they have to overcome this season, because it's been a lot. It's been a lot with the injuries, with everything going on. It's tough. It's tough, though. Immaculate makes a good point. Got to come over the head coach. Ryan Grubb, you got to think is going to have a lot of offers. You got to think Ryan Grubb is going to be sought after, and maybe he might have his pick if he wants to be a head coach. Okay, if considering all of the openings, I don't think Ryan Grubb is going to be maybe in some of the more elite jobs like an A&M, or maybe if like Michigan becomes open, if Jim Harbaugh moves on to the NFL, something like that. But I think Ryan Grubb is going to be a highly sought after, as he should be, a highly sought after candidate currently in this head coaching carousel that we know is about to happen. So we've talked about Nebraska and we've talked about Iowa, two teams that are very similar but are yet pretty darn different as it pertains to all of the aspects of their football team. I'm going to try to get to some comments as well. Ray Owens, the West Coast teams are going to take some time to adjust to week in, week out physical football. They're about to face teams that play physical, hard-nosed defense. This is a comment of why I believe Oregon is best suited to make the transition. I believe Dan Lanning has done a great job recruiting and building up the interior, the offensive line, and the defensive line as well. And then he surrounded it with really good players at the skill position. The big thing for Dan Lanning as we approach 2024 is going to be what comes after Bo Nix, what comes after Bucky Irving, what comes after Troy Franklin, what comes after all of these skill positions. This is a team in the Ducks this season that I believe can make a run to a national championship. If I'm casting my vote for the Heisman right now, I'm probably casting my vote for Bo Nix. But you look beyond Oregon, USC, holy crap, you got to do something on that defense. And I said that coming into this season. You're not going to fix that defense in one season at USC. You're just not. All right? And I always said for a lot of these teams in UCLA, who's good on defense, but can they keep it up? Right? And can Dante Moore improve and develop enough this offseason to be a really good quarterback in the Big Ten next season? When we saw Dante, there were flashes, but we didn't see a ton of it, right? There was maybe a little bit more roller coaster than Bruin fans would like as they approach the Big Ten sometime next season. But the thing is, those West Coast teams, I agree with you, Ray, they need to adjust, but some teams within the Big Ten, I've been talking about it this whole stream, these West Division teams, they are going to need to adjust. They need to get better on the offensive side of the ball because you look at all of those teams, I think they got to get a lot better on the offensive side of the football, right? Because you know what USC is going to do, you know what Oregon is going to do, you know what Washington is going to do, you know what all of these teams are going to do. It's going to be an interesting clash of styles, right, as we approach next season. But as it pertains to this season, there is still some football left for one of these teams. For the Iowa Hawkeyes, they are moving on to the Big Ten championship game. Thanks, everybody, for checking in here at the live stream tonight. So here's what I want to say. This was kind of my first attempt at this. I'd always just recorded videos and then published them out. I am going to take my original commentary and publish it out on YouTube after this. But tomorrow, Michigan, Ohio State. I will confirm later if there will be a live stream for that one after that game as well. So we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Pay attention to some of the community posts and Twitter posts on my page as well. Want to thank everybody for tuning into the show tonight. Thank you, Tim, for being here. Michigan, Ohio State. A gigantic collision between two behemoths in the sport. We'll let you know if we're coming on live following that one. I would say the chances are pretty darn good that is going to happen following the Wolverines and the Buckeyes. All right, folks, we will see you probably tomorrow after the Wolverines and the Buckeyes. Hawkeyes get it done beating Nebraska, send them to the offseason. Iowa, 10 wins. What a way to finish this season for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Folks, never count out Iowa. All right, we'll see you next time.